3, 2, 1, and we're on. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our very first live broadcast of what I am calling at this point Boring JavaScript Projects. I am TheVirtuoid, aka Mike Smith, and today we're going to cover a very simple JavaScript project, just a little game, and we'll show you here in just a minute, that will kind of explore a couple of different things that there are about JavaScript. Just before we get started here, I do want to mention that this is a live broadcast, so Lord knows anything can happen. There is a little delay for the comments, so if you do leave a comment, I may or may not be able to get to it in time. We'll deal with that as we go along here. Like I said, it's my first broadcast. We'll figure out what needs to happen. So anyway, like I said, this is my very first broadcast. We're going to be doing a JavaScript project. And so what I want to do now is I want to first of all show you what kind of project we're going to do. We're going to be able to create a simple HTML file with some CSS. We'll create some JavaScript classes that by the end of the hour, starting completely from scratch, you'll have a complete working game. And what is that game? It's going to be a snake game. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So what I want to do here first of all is I want to show you what a snake game looks like. So if you type in snake game in Google, you will get to this little menu here. And if we click on play and start it off here, you will see things that are happening. Now what's happening here is I'm using the arrow keys to move the snake. And the idea here is to capture an apple. And I just captured an apple there. And notice that there's a score in the upper left-hand corner that keeps a score of how many apples there are that I have eaten. Now, if I hit the sides, the game will end. But also, if you notice that the snake's length grows each and every single time I eat an apple. And so the game will also end if you hit your tail. I hit the side at that point, so it doesn't really matter. So the idea here is that you have a snake, you eat apples, the snake grows, and if you hit the tail or if you hit the corner, the game is over. So let's go through the process here of what we're going to be working with here, or what the different files are going to be to create a snake game. So I'm going to hit play one more time and try and show you what's going on here. First of all, we're going to be creating 6 different JavaScript files. And the first JavaScript file is going to be the file that's going to be called from the HTML. And I'll show you that here in just a minute. And that's going to create or launch the game itself. First of all, then we're going to create 5 different classes. And each of these classes will control different aspects of the game. The first is going to be a game class, and it's going to control the entire game. And it's responsible for controlling the board, and it's responsible for controlling the scoreboard that you see in the upper left-hand corner here. Now, I'm not going to show you, I'm not going to create exactly what you're seeing here. We're going to create something completely different. But the game will control the board and the scoreboard. The second class will be the scoreboard, and it will control the counting of the scores and displaying the score, and also be responsible for viewing our game over sign and our button that we will use to play again. Our third class will be the field class, and it will be responsible for drawing the field, drawing the snake, drawing the marker, which is the apple in this case, and determining whether the game needs to stop or the game needs to stop if there happens to be a collision. The fourth class is the snake class, and is responsible for moving the snake and growing the snake. And finally, there is a marker class that is responsible for drawing the marker at each individual place on the screen whenever it gets eaten by the snake. So again, that's all we're going to do here. We've got the HTML to cover everything, the CSS to display everything, and then the 6 JavaScript classes to be able to create the game itself. So this is going to be our HTML page. Right now, it says it can't find anything because there's absolutely nothing there. And how do we know there's nothing there? Well, if we go to the code here and take a look on the left-hand side, you can see there's absolutely nothing there. So now we're going to go through and create the game itself. Now, for the sake of time and everything, I've already got it created on another screen for the live broadcast here. And we're just going to do some cut, copy, and pasting, and I'm going to show you different pieces of the game as we go along here. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to need to create our CSS files, our HTML files, any kind of image files, which we don't have any. So what I normally do, and what's kind of standard here, and this is just me, is I create different directories. And you're not going to be able to see the menus that I'm creating here, but I'm going to create, first of all, a CSS directory for all my CSS files. I'm going to create a JavaScript directory for all my JavaScript files. and I'm going to create an image directory for all my image files. Now, by the way, I'm using WebStorm here, a great little product, but you can also use Visual Studio or any of your favorite IDEs. You don't have to use WebStorm. Okay, so this creates the basic structure. Our CSS files are going to be under the CSS directory. The image files are going to be under image directory, and the JavaScript files are going to be under JavaScript. Now, I only got one image. It's my favicon. So I'm going to copy my favicon over, and we don't have to worry about that anymore. So the first thing I want to do here is I want to create the HTML file. So let's go to the root directory and let's create an HTML file. And we're going to call it snake.html. Now this is a template that I've developed for my WebStorm to give me everything I need for an HTML file. But again, for sake of purposes, I'm just going to copy over the HTML file that I have before, because once we create it, we're not going to make any changes to it. We're going to be concentrating on JavaScript here. A couple important things is, first of all, I do have my favicon. You always got to have a favicon. I've got my CSS file here. This is how we're pulling it in, and the title of the game itself. Now here's the actual game, the display for the game. Two very important parts here. The first part is the canvas. We're going to be using the HTML canvas element to be able to draw everything on the screen. Now we're just going to be doing some very basic stuff with the canvas, so don't expect this to be a tutorial on all the different things you can do with canvas for drawing graphics on the screen. Maybe for later we'll do something like that, but for now we're just going to just do a very simple drawing of the canvas. Notice I've given it an ID of board here. That's going to be very important later on for the JavaScript to be able to find that board. This section right here is the scoreboard. This is going to be the scoreboard we're going to use for the game here. And it's got a couple of very important pieces. It's got a place where it's going to keep the score. And again, notice I have an ID there to be able to have JavaScript find the score real quick. I have a little game over script that I'm going to or text I'm going to show when the game is over, plus a button that's going to allow me to play again. And these, by default, these are going to be hidden when you first start the game, so you won't see these until we get later on to the process here. And finally, the most important thing is down here. This is where I'm loading up the script to start the game itself. This is the Snake game script. This is going to load the game class, and then launch the game class itself so that the game class can then control the entire game as we go along. You'll see that in just a second. So now that we've got that ready to go and going, let's go ahead and create, first of all, our CSS file. We're going to call our CSS file Snake because that's what we called it inside the HTML. So let's just go ahead, and I'm going to do a simple copy of all my CSS. And again, I'm not going to go through CSS here, but this is just going to help format the screen very simply and very plainly. I'm not even going to use the CSS file or go through it here again. The big thing here is going to be the JavaScript. So let's now create our 6 JavaScript files. Our first JavaScript file is going to be our Snake game JavaScript file. And this is what's going to control our Snake. This is going to be launched from the HTML to control or to launch the game itself. Then we're going to create our 5 classes. And the first class is going to be our game class. And that creates the game class. Now I want to show you something here real quick in case you're new to JavaScript. Notice that I have capitalized the name game here, but I've also capitalized the name of the file. And that is by convention. You don't have to do that, but by convention within JavaScript, and this is also true of a lot of languages, usually you uppercase the name of your classes both in the file name and in the class itself. So anybody coming along after you can take a look at it and say, oh, that's a class. And so, you know, it kind of gives them it's a maintenance type deal. Don't have to do it, but I strongly suggest doing it because everybody else does it. So we got the game class. The next thing we're going to need is going to be the scoreboard class. So let's create the scoreboard class. And this is really the only time I'm going to be typing much of anything. That creates our scoreboard class. Now we're going to create the board class. That creates the board class. Next, we're going to create the Snake class. Whoops. There's our Snake class, And then finally, we're going to create the marker class. And the marker is going to be the apple. And I'm calling it marker because it could be anything other than an apple, but I'm just calling it a generic name called marker. So here's our export default class marker. So that creates our 5 different classes and our JavaScript. So let's actually get something up and running. Let me make sure I've got a script here to make sure I've got everything correct. So let's actually see if this game will run. So let's flip back over to our code. Our browser, excuse me. And let's do a Control F5. Yep, there it is. Hey, we got our first information on our HTML page here. Here's our scoreboard, here's our footer, and this big, huge white area is going to be our canvas and our field. So now let's start creating the JavaScript to get everything on there. So first thing I want to do here is let's create the board. Let's just get something up on the screen to create the board itself. So to be able to do that, we've already got all our HTML there. Let's go to the board class and let's start filling in the information that we're going to need for the board. Let's go surfing now. All right, let's go to the board. I'm going to first enter in all of our public data here. Now, if you are used to, let's get rid of these. Oops, actually, I want to comment those out here real quick. Now, if you're new to JavaScript, normally you would create public data within the constructor, saying this dot height equals whatever. But this is the new way you can also create public data. Anything that is outside the constructor automatically is a public piece of data. A lot of information here. Let's just go through it here real quick. Height and width is going to be the number of squares on our field, our board. If you can imagine the board being a big square, it's going to have 40 squares across and 40 squares down. So our height and the width is going to be 40 squares. The square height and square width is going to be 16 pixels. The border itself is also going to be 16 pixels. That's just the border around the square that if the snake hits, it ends. The rest of this stuff is canvas width, canvas size for calculations. Our color of our border is going to be red. The color of our field is going to be green. And then I just have two just general declarations here that will contain the canvas and what we call the canvas context, which I'll explain here in just a second. So that's the data we're going to be using. Let's pop the constructor in for the class. Here's our constructor. Doesn't do much of anything. It does pass an ID. And remember I said that when we create all this, when the game creates it, it's going to pass to the board the ID within the HTML. And if we go back to the HTML, we have an ID here. So what the game will do is it will pass that ID to the board. And so when the board creates itself, it's going to know, hey, this is where the canvas is located. And that's where I'm going to have this canvas data and the CTX data. And the CTX data within a canvas is a get context. When you draw on a canvas on HTML, you don't necessarily draw on the canvas itself. You draw on what's called a context. And you can also, for example, you can get a context called 3D, for example, if you want to do 3D work on it. I don't think it's really supported very well, but mostly everybody does 2D work upon a canvas. So the get context here tells us that, hey, we're going to be doing 2D work, and everything is on the context, which is going to be my CTX. So all the drawing I'm going to do is going to be on that. And all this information here simply reformats the canvas to make absolutely certain, both from the HTML level and from the JavaScript level, that I have a canvas that is big enough to be able to handle the 40 squares and the 16 pixel border. So we've got the constructor there. Let's go to an initialize. So we're going to need to be able to initialize all of this board once we start new games. And all I'm going to have at this point right now is just going to be this section. This is the display field. So I'm going to have a routine here in initialization that's responsible for displaying the field. So of course the next thing we're going to need here is a display field method. So if we go to display field, this is where the drawing occurs. This is where my CTX is, where I'm using the CTX to be able to draw information. Fill style is where I'm telling the CTX that, hey, okay, this is the color I'm going to want to fill. Excuse me, this is the color I want to fill whenever I fill in or use a fill method within the context. In this case, I'm going to do the border color first. This is the fill rect method, and that basically says fill in a square on the canvas. Starting at position 0, starting at the X, the X position, the Y position for this width and this height. And so this will fill the entire thing up with a border color. Now, why the border color and not the field color? Well, because it's much easier to fill everything in the border and then fill a smaller section with the field than to do the field first and then try to figure out to do the square around the field. So I just fill the whole thing up with the border color and then fill a smaller square of the field and get what I want. And that's what I do down here in this section, is I'm filling it up with the field color and then filling it up in a smaller square for the field itself. Green field color is green. So that displays the board. Now, the game class is what controls the scoreboard and the board. So now we're going to need to do some things in the game class to be able to tell it that the board is there. So let's go over to the game class, which right now is completely and totally empty. And let's copy over some things there. First thing we're going to do here, and I'm just going to type this in straight. We're going to have a board variable, and this is going to contain the board itself. Let's pop in the constructor. And the constructor is going to initialize the board. And I'm going to take off this information because that's not what we need here. So this is what's going to be able to bring in this is going to initiate the board or initialize a new board instance with the board ID. But notice, I don't know if you can, yeah, you can probably notice here, but notice on the board, you know, I just suddenly realized I've been off of my, I forgot to switch over the screen. That's what you get for this first time through for not looking at your script here. So let me go through very quickly there what we did with the board. I greatly apologize for that. I just noticed that. This is the data that we've added in for the board that I mentioned earlier. This is the constructor that allows us to construct the board. This is the initialization that will initialize the information for the board itself, and this will actually display the field. So now that you got caught up when I made a mistake and didn't get my thing switched over, we'll see if that happens again. Let's flip back over to the game, and notice that on the board here, I am passing the ID of the board, but I am needing to get a new board instance. So to be able to do that inside JavaScript, we're going to need to import it. And to import it's very simple. All you need to do is to type in import board from board.js. And that's all you need to do. And that imports the board class into the JavaScript module so that it now can be used within the constructor for the game. And then finally for the game, we're also going to need to be able to initialize the information, or initialize the board, or initialize the game itself. And this is for later on when we want to basically start a new game. And I'm going to, first of all, take off the starting position. We're not going to need that yet. And we're going to take off the scoreboard. So here's the board.initialize, and that initializes the board. So this is all we need within the game. So the game has an initialization process and which initializes the board. Now we need to initialize the game, and that is within our Snake game. So we're finally going to get information that's being done by our Snake game itself. So let's go over to the Snake game. And again, this is the JavaScript that is brought in by the HTML. And let's pop this in real quick. There we go. So again, we're importing the game because we have to import the class. We're going to create a new game, and then we're going to initialize it. And this will eventually be initialization where we're going to put the snake. And so don't worry about this right now. It doesn't really matter. So that basically should, unless I've made a mistake, should give us the ability to bring up a game. So let's flip over to our browser, and let's do a Control F5 and see if I made a mistake. Hi, there we go. Didn't quite make a mistake. We have our board. As you can see, it has the red border around it and the green field. So everything's going to happen within that particular green field. Yay! Got the border, got the game up. So now I'm making sure I'm getting back to our code. And next thing we want to do here is we want to create the scoreboard. So we've created the board, we've created the game controls the board, the game also controls the scoreboard. So now let's create the scoreboard itself. So let's flip over to the scoreboard and let's pop some code inside here. So within the scoreboard, oops, shouldn't have put two there. The scoreboard takes care of the score, so there's the score, and these are going to be pointers that I'm going to create to point to different parts of the scoreboard. The scoreboard itself, where the game over text is, where the restart button is, and where the score is going to actually be located. And all that's going to be done within the constructor. So let's go to the constructor, and let's pop the constructor in there. This is where I set up those first 4 variables, and I'm just using what we call the get element ID to first of all get to the actual part of the scoreboard, because JavaScript is going to sit there. When we create this, we're going to pass it an ID, and that ID, if we flip back over to the HTML, is going to be the ID of scoreboard right here, to kind of give the scoreboard area saying, hey, this is the section where the scoreboard is going to be located. So let's flip back over to scoreboard. The rest of these is going to find, using the query selector, is going to find the different pieces within the scoreboard of the data we're going to need: the score, this game over text, and the restart button. And then we're finally going to call reset, which is going to reset everything back to 0. Obviously, we don't have reset on here yet, so we need to have reset. So let's pop reset on here. Here's reset. What does reset do? Well, it sets the score to 0. It removes a show token. This is a CSS. What I've done here is I've got a CSS class called show, which will display game over and play again. By default, those are not shown on the screen. When I want them to show on the screen later on, when we have a section where we describe how we do the game over, I want them to show on the screen. So I'm going to add the class called show to the game over and the game over DOM and the restart DOM. So since we're restarting the game, we got to make them disappear again. So we're removing that show class. And then finally, we're going to display the scoreboard. Now, obviously, we don't have the display on there. So let's now do the display section. So let's go to display method, not section. So let's go to the display method. And what does the display method do? It just sets the context of the score. That's it. It doesn't do anything else besides that. So that's real simple and real quick. So now the scoreboard is created, we need to tell game that there is a scoreboard class. So what we're going to do now is let's flip over to game. And within the game section, we're going to now add the scoreboard to our properties, because we're going to be creating a scoreboard instance. And then within the constructor here, we're going to pop in the code to create the new scoreboard. And again, I'm passing the ID of the scoreboard. Notice that I got a little underline my ID here. So my ID is saying, hey, you don't have the import statement. So let's flip back and pop the import statement in for scoreboard. And that puts the import statement for scoreboard, so that makes it all nice and pretty down here for the scoreboard. And next thing we're going to do is the initialization, because the initialization is what starts the game. So we obviously we have to initialize the scoreboard. So let's pop the scoreboard, and the initialization part of the scoreboard is called reset. So when we initialize the game, it's going to initialize the board, which draws it on the screen. It's going to initialize the scoreboard, which sets it off to 0. And that's it. Let's save it. Let's flip over to our code and let's see what happens. We hit Control F5, and as you can tell, absolutely nothing happened because the score was already 0 to begin with. Believe me, it worked. But now the game knows that we have a scoreboard and we have a board. So next thing we want to do now is to create the snake itself. So let's pop the snake. Let's pop back over to our code real quick. And let's now create the snake. Now the snake class again is controlled by the board, and the snake class is responsible for drawing up the snake and making sure that there's been no collision with the snake itself, as also the tail grows for the snake. So let's pop that information in for the snake. Let's get the properties first in there, and the properties are going to be fairly easy. Everything is going to be done on the XY coordinates here. First of all, I got the head, XY, and the head is what's going to control whether we've made a collision with a marker, the apple, or we made a collision with the tail, or we made a collision with the border. The tail is going to be an array, and this array allows you to be able to add elements to it, and each element within the tail is going to be XY coordinate that will represent each segment of the tail. So as we add to it, this array will just grow longer and longer and longer, and eventually things will happen. The color of the head is going to be black, the color of the tail is going to be red, and the direction is going to be blank for right now. The direction is either going to be N, E, S, or W. That represents north, east, south, or west, and that will determine which way our snake is going to be moving when it moves. So there is no constructor for the snake, but we do need to have one other thing there. We need to tell the system what the starting position for the snake is going to be. And so that's going to be the set starting position method within our snake. And that takes the 4 arguments. Remember earlier I said, you know, we ignore the 4 arguments. That's going to be for the snake. Well, now you don't ignore it. It's going to take an XY coordinate. This is going to be the starting coordinate where the head's going to be. It's going to be the starting direction and the length of the tail. And all this routine does here is just set the head, set the tail, set the direction. It figures out based upon the direction where the tail is going to go. So if your starting direction is north, you want the tail going south. If your starting direction is east, you want the tail going west, and vice versa. West, tail goes east, south, tail goes north. And that's what this section right here does. And then this is just a simple little while loop to be able to push the new XY coordinates onto the tail to build our length worth of tail. So that's all there really is to it. Okay, the board controls the snake. So now that we've got the very basics for the snake, let's now flip over to the board and start working with the board. First of all, the board is going to need that snake imported. So let's import the snake. And the second thing is that earlier I had commented out the snake constructor, the line that initialized the snake, excuse me, and so now I'm uncommenting it out. So I'm now creating the snake here, and this creates a completely new snake. Alrighty. Now, each part of the field is split up into 40 blocks long and 40 blocks tall, and each block is going to be colored in with either a marker or the head of the snake or the tail of the snake. So the first thing I want to do here is I want to create a routine that will do nothing but draw a block on the screen. And then we'll call that routine multiple times to draw the marker or the tail or the snake. And we're going to call that one the draw routine. So let me get my code over here and let's get to the draw. And this is very simple. Again, it's going to be using the CTX. Whoops. It's going to be using the CTX here to set the fill style to the color. I'm going to pass as an argument, and then fill a rectangle that will start at position X and position Y and will be the length of the square, which again was 16 pixels. So this will fill just a single square in my 40 by 40 field. All right, we need to be able to display the snake because the board controls the snake, so the board is going to be responsible for displaying the snake. So we'll put that after display field. So here's display snake. First thing it's going to do is it's going to draw the head. And so we're going to pass it the head coordinates, which is this snake.head, and we're going to pass it the color, which is the snake.head color. Then we're going to go use the for each method on the array to be able to draw each and every single segment of the tail. And that's real simple. There's not much to it. That's really all there is. Okay, on the initialization, once we initialize everything on the field, we go to initialization, and we display the snake. We display the snake with initialization. Now, the other thing I want to do here is I want to set the starting position of the snake. So I now go into the initialize at the very beginning also, and I want to set the starting position. Now, why am I doing this? The reason I'm doing this, in fact, also what I want to do here is, let's flip back up here. Nope, we don't need to do that right there. So we also doing the set starting position of the snake, and this will allow us to be able to say, or allow us to be able to set the starting position of the snake itself when the board gets initialized. Now on the game, let's flip over to the game, because remember the game controls the board controls the snake. So let's go over to the game, and let's add the information, any information needed for the game. All right. We're going to go to the properties, and we're going to add a set starting position property, and I'll explain that here in just a second. And then we're going to initialize that inside the initializer. And why am I saving it? Now, the reason I'm saving it here in this case, because later on, once we do a play again, I'm going to use the old position that was originally created for the starting position as the new position for the snake. So every time you create the game, the snake will always start in the same position. So I'm saving the starting position once we first initialize the game itself. Alrighty. I think that should do it. Yep, that should do it. We should be okay. So let's flip back over to our browser and make sure I am flipped over to the browser here. And let's do a Control F5. And if I've done everything right, we should have the snake on the screen. And yes, the snake is on the screen. There's the head which is what we're going to be using to determine whether there's a collision or not. And here is the tail, which is the length of 5 different characters. So now we've got the snake on the screen. Let's get the snake moving. Now, to get the snake moving, it's going to take 3 different pieces. The first thing it's going to take is we're going to need some sort of keyboard routine. And the keyboard routine is going to say whether we hit the arrow keys, the up, down, left, or right keys is going to go up, right, left, or down. In fact, I'm going to add the WASD keys because, you know, hardcore gamers who are all millions of hardcore gamers are going to play this game once we're done here. They always use WASD, so I'm going to add WASD. We're also going to need some way to detect the collision because once the snake starts moving, if it gets past this border here, you know, it's just going to go off to the neighborhood, kill a couple of kids, which may be a good thing, may not be, but the fact of the matter is you want to be able to stop it once it has a collision. So the second thing we're going to need to do is to create a way to be able to determine or to stop the movement of the snake if a collision has occurred. And then the third thing we're going to do is actually move the snake. So let's take these one step at a time. Let's flip back over to the code, make sure I am flipped over back to the code, which I am. I'm sorry I missed that the first time, y'all, but hey, it's my first try. That's the way it goes. So let's flip back over to the code. And let's first of all add the keyboard handling routines. Now, the game itself, the game class is going to handle the keyboard. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new map within JavaScript, which is one of the new container that you can do within JavaScript. And this map is going to be able to associate different key strokes or different key codes with a particular direction. So in this case, I have selected the arrow up to represent the north direction, the arrow down to represent the south direction, the arrow right to represent the east direction, and the arrow left to represent the west direction. And the same thing with the WDSA keys to represent north, east, south, and west. So that's going to be my mapping. So whenever I hit a key, I'm going to grab that key code from this map. If it comes out to be null, which means I can't find it, nothing's going to happen. Otherwise, it's going to set the direction of the snake. Next thing we got to do is add the event listener. And the event listener is very, very important. So if we go back to the constructor, once we constructed the game, we're going to add the event listener. It's going to sit there and say, it's going to wait for a keystroke to happen. And when that keystroke happens, it's going to do the process keystroke routine within the game. So obviously we're going to need the process keystroke routine. So let's do the process keystroke routine. And I'm going to remove this code because we'll get to that a little bit later. All right, the process keystroke routine is going to get the direction from the direction map and then pass that straight into the board using the set direction method, which has not been created yet. So obviously we got to be able to create that within the process key, within the board. So let's flip back over to the board. Go to our board.js and let's pop in the set direction. Down at the bottom, set direction. So what does set direction do? Well, if there is actual direction, because when we get the information from the mapping, if there's no code, if there's no key there, it's going to automatically return to us null. So if there is a direction, which means we actually have something, we're going to set the snake's direction to direction. And that's it. We're just setting the snake property direction. Because every time the snake moves, it's going to change its way. It's going to change its way based upon a direction that's already been stored. So all we're going to do here in this set direction, or in the board, is just set the direction. And that's it. We can't test anything because all we've done is just done a keyboard, so I can hit keys all day long and nothing's going to happen on the screen. So the second part we're going to need to do is do the collision detection. So let's go to the collision detection and let's go to the snake. Now remember, the snake controls whether it's going to be colliding with something or not. So what we're going to do here is basically a two-step process. First off, we're going to have a code called get next head position. Because the idea here is that we don't want to move the snake and then determine that there's a collision. If that's the case, the snake is going to overwrite, for instance, the border, and it's going to look terrible. We want to determine whether the collision has occurred before we actually draw the snake out. So the routine called get next head position takes that direction that, remember, we just saved that direction with the last routine here. It will take that direction and determine what the next head position is going to be. It hasn't drawn it out yet, but it's going to tell us what the next head position is going to be. And that's important because our next routine called hit tail, which I will have here, allows us to be able to figure out whether we've hit the tail. And so, of course, the first thing it's going to do is try to figure out what the next head position is going to be. That's what it calls on get next head position. And it's going to do the sum method here to be able to determine whether it's hit a tail. And the sum method will return true if any one of the elements matches the function that I passed to it. And the function I'm passing to it is real simple. I'm just testing to find out if the x position, the x property of the next position equals the tail segment, and or the x of the tail segment, and the y property of the next position equals the y property of the segment. So both of those equals, we know we've hit a tail, and sum will return true. Otherwise, if none of the elements match, it will return false. So we now know hit tail will return true or return false. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the board, because again the board controls the snake, and we're now going to tell the board about how to handle the collisions. So, and that's going to be under the collision routine. So here's the collision routine. I got to get the snake head position again. Real simple. And this is going to be, this is actually a very simple little process here. I got to figure out whether I'm going to collide either with the border or with the tail. So this first section here, let me just highlight this. The first section here tests whether it's going to be on the border, which means that the next head position for x or y is going to be 0, or it's going to be in the border on the left and right, which means that we're at, for lack of a better term, position 41. Remember, we're 40 long and 40 deep. So if we're at position 41 on the right-hand side or 41 at the bottom, then we've also hit the border. And then finally, we're adding in the hit tail, which is what we did with the snake here. And I'm using the OR operator here, which basically means that if any one of these conditions returns true, we're going to return true. All of them have to be false for us to return false. So now we know that collision will return true or false. And that's all the board needs to know. So can we run the game? No, because the snake's not moving. So here's the third step. Let's get the snake moving. So here we go. Snake moving time. Let's go to the snake and let's move the snake. And to do that on the snake, we're going to have a routine called, this maybe it comes to a shock to you, called move. And what I'm going to do here, there's the move. And it's real simple. I'm going to save the last segment on the tail section here. Remember, as we're moving here, we're going to move all of the different tail segments up by one. So I'm taking for instance, the fifth element of the tail, moving it to the fourth element, the fourth element moving to the third, third moving to the second, second moving to the first, and then for the 0th element, I'm putting that into the new head position. I'm going to get the new next head position, and I'm going to save that as the head position. Finally, I've got an argument here called grow. Remember, if we eat a marker, then we grow. And if we grow, we're going to push the old final element back onto the tail. And I got that old final element back up here. Now, we do that. By doing that, that means everything will automatically grow. Otherwise, it will just continue on. And we'll return that final element. And why do we return that final element? Well, we'll show you that here next. Because we now got to go to the board. Because again, the board controls the snake. And within the board, we're going to do the move snake routine. The board has a, oh, whoops. Made a mistake. Hang on. There, I got my keys all wrong. Okay, so on the board here, we're going to have a move routine. And I'm going to take out some code here to make it a little bit easier to take a look at. And also because that's dealing with what we're going to be covering here shortly here. So the move snake moves the snake. And basically it's going to have a routine here that's going to return two different values, a stop game and a score. And this is going to tell the game class that whether we're going to need to stop the game or we had a score. I'm not going to worry about score right now. That's not going to be important. So by default, we're going to stop the game and have no score. First thing we're going to do is test for the collision. If there is no collision, which is what does not this collision, not false equals true, which means we execute everything here. But if not true equals false, then we just return what we have, which is stop the game and score. Because if we have a collision, we just want to stop the game and that's it. The game is over with. If there is no collision, we get we move the snake, we physically internally move the snake, and we get that last position, and we display the snake. Now, why do we save that last position? Because if you think about it, as we've drawn the snake, if we draw the snake it's going to, when we display the snake, it's going to display the snake in the new position, but the old tail, the final position of the tail, is still going to have the red color to it. We need to be able to erase that. So by saving the last position, we erase the last position of the draw. Now what happens if there's a grow? We don't need to erase it. Technically, we should have not do this. There's some code inefficiencies here, but don't worry about that. But the fact of the matter is here is that the last position is important to us because we need to erase that last position. Otherwise, we'll just have a big old huge trail that will continue on, and it'll just look terrible on the screen. And because we know everything is okay, we're setting the stop game to false. And that's all there really is to the move snake section. Now the game controls the board, so let's flip back over to the game and add a couple things to the game. Now on the game side, the game also needs to move the snake. So let's have the game move the snake. And I'm going to erase some information there and erase that. And again, we'll be covering that here shortly, so that's why I'm erasing that. Here's where we move the snake, and again, we're getting back a stop game and a score, and we're just going to check for the stop game right now. If there is a stop game, we need to actually stop the game. So we're going to need a stop method inside there, and the stop method, let me pop that in here. There's our stop method, and we're just going to clear out some scoreboard stuff here since we'll get to that here shortly. And the stop method's idea here is going to clear out the interval. Now notice it's clearing out the interval for a timer. Remember, when we're going to set an interval. In fact, let me go ahead and get the go on here real quick, kind of get these two together for you. So let's go ahead and put the go on there. Now the go is going to set a timer. And remember, set interval basically says to execute this line of code or this function in this number of milliseconds. So every 100 milliseconds, this snake is going to move in the direction that we have told it to move. Now we need to put the timer property up there. So let's flip up here to the game and pop our timer inside there. And now we got our timer ready to go. So we got a stop and we got the go. Next thing we have to do, remember the game is initialized and executed by the snake game. So if we go to the snake game routine, the final thing we're going to need to do here is we're going to say game.go. So this is within the snake game that's loaded up with HTML. So now we technically have a fully functioning game here. We imported the game, we create a new game, we initialize the game, and we go. That's it. There's no more code to the snake game. Once the game.go gets hold, it will just do everything it needs to do within the class. Now that we've done the keyboard handler, we've done the collision detection, and we've done the border, if I have missed something, it won't work. Otherwise, it should work. Let's flip back over to the code, to the browser. Let's do a Control F5. And yes, it's moving. There it goes. Now I'm going to do the up arrow. Up arrow works. Right arrow works. Down arrow works. Left arrow works. W works. D works. S works. A works. Let's test the top border. Yep, it stopped. Perfect. Let's test the right border. Yep, it stopped. Perfect. Let's test the bottom border. Yep, stop there. Perfect. Let's test the left border. Yep, stop there. Finally, let's test the tail. Yeah, perfect. So all of our keyboard routines work. I've tested all the arrows in the WASD. All of the collisions work. And obviously the snake moved because it moved. So we've basically we now got everything animating wise and working here with the canvas itself. So let's start putting the pieces together that actually gets the game running. The next thing we're going to do here is we're going to create the marker. And again, the marker, if you saw the original game here, it was like apple. Now I'm just having a marker on the screen. I'm not going to show it as an apple. So let's pop the marker code inside there. And let's go to our marker, which we haven't touched yet at all. And let's put the code in there. And you'll be surprised to know this is all the code there is to marker. It's very simple. I have the XY coordinate of the marker and the color aqua, but I have a routine here called generate new position. And its purpose is to be able to generate a marker on a different part of the field. And I'm passing into it the field itself. And this will allow me to be able to get the field width and the field height so I know I won't have a collision. Or I know I won't, randomize it somewhere else. And this little section right here will allow me to determine whether I have accidentally put the marker, randomize the marker onto the head or onto the tail. So I want to randomize the marker anywhere within the screen except for the borders and except for the head and the tail of the snake. So this whole routine here, here's my random routine, and here's where I determine where I've hit the snake. And that's really all there is to it. Once it says I haven't hit the snake, it's going to return this, and this is going to have the X and Y already in there. So that's the marker. So the board controls the marker, so let's throw everything into the board. Let's go back to the top there. We got to first import the information into the board. So let's import marker. And we're going to uncomment at that for the property here. So now I've got a marker property that creates a whole new marker, and everything's going to be run from the marker. Alrighty, now let's go over to the move snake code down back at the very bottom. And I had taken a lot of stuff out of there, so I am now going to go to the board and put all of that stuff in the move snake back in, because the marker depends upon the collision. So let's highlight the move snake and pop it all back in there. So what we've done here, I'm going to take out one piece of code. What we've done here now is what's different about the code of what we had before is this little section right here, and this determines whether we've hit the marker or not. So we need to be able to do the marker. So I need to create a routine called marker collision, which will determine whether I have collided with the marker or not, and that's a really simple little method. So let's pop that method in there. So the marker collision basically returns whether the snake head is equal to the marker, or the snake head X is equal to the marker X, or snake head Y is equal to the marker Y. Very, very simple there. And so hit marker will come back as true or false. If it is true, that means we have a score, because this is still a collision, but obviously it's not a game-ending collision. So the score is true. We set the score true, and so then we actually, after that, we need to generate a new marker position. So let's pop the code in here to generate a new marker position. Now remember, in the marker earlier, we popped in generate new position, and there it is right there. Real simple and real quick. Once we get a new position, we're going to display the marker. So we're going to need the display marker code inside there. So let's get the display marker code. And that's going to be about the easiest thing in the world. And I'm going to put it up here next to display snake, kind of keep them all together. Then the marker is just one square long, or one square in size here. So we're going to draw the marker with the marker color. That's it. There's really nothing else to it at that point. So the last thing we're going to do here is that the generate marker position, we need the program to be able to, the program to be able to tell us once it initializes to create a completely new marker position. So let's flip back over to the initialize section and tell us to be able to create a completely new marker position at the very beginning of the game with the initialize. So if everything works, our marker should be on the screen. Let's flip back over to the browser. Let's Control F5 it. Yep, there's the marker. And if I hit it, it goes to another part of the screen. So that means that the collision detection was correct, and the marker knew to go to another place within the code. So let's kill it by hitting the border here. And let's flip back over to our code. So now that we've created the marker, we need to add the scoring in there, because every time you hit the marker, it's going to get a new score. So let's pop the scoring inside there. Real easy here. Let's go to the scoreboard, code itself. And remember, the scoreboard is what controls the scoring. So we're going to have a new routine here called increment. And its whole purpose is to increment the score and then display the new score. That's it. If we go over to the game, back to the game, because the game controls the scoreboard, we go back into move snake, and I'm going to pop that code in there. Where is it? There it is. Almost lost my code there. So let's go back over to the game. Let's go to the move snake, and I had taken out some code earlier. So I'm going to now put it back in and not mess up my syntax here. So remember earlier, the move snake gives us back a stop game and a score. If stop game, of course, is true, then we stop the game. If the score is true, then we're going to increment the scoreboard. And that's it. By incrementing the scoreboard, that should call the increment method on the scoreboard, increment our score, and display it on the screen. Well, let's see if it does it. So let's flip back over to our browser. Let's Control F5 and watch the upper right-hand corner where it says scoreboard. Should say 1. Yep, it says 1. That's great. All righty, so say 2. Let's just make sure it works a couple times. It does say 2. That's good. So now what we'll do is we'll crash it on purpose here. So as you can tell there, now the scoreboard is working. So the snake is moving, we're hitting the marker, and the scoreboard is incrementing. So next thing to do is, if you remember on the snake, every time you ate the marker, the snake grew and kept growing and growing. Luckily, that's extraordinarily easy because of all the code that we've made. So let's flip back over to the code, and let's go over to the board, because the board again controls the snake. Now within the board, I had deleted some code within the move snake routine right here. This is what actually moves the snake. Now if you go back to the snake on the move routine, there is an argument called grow that defaults to false, which means by default we're not going to grow the snake. But if we want to grow the snake, we need to pass the argument of true. So inside the board here, we need to pass a true or false argument. Now how do we determine that? Well, that's real easy. We're back up to here to hit marker. Hit marker is going to be true if we hit the marker, or it's going to be false if we don't hit the marker. So the easiest thing to do is just put hit marker down there. Since hit marker is going to be true, we know we have to grow the snake, and the snake should automatically grow. And that's it. There's nothing else to do it. Let's go back to our browser. Let's Control F5 it, and let's hit the marker a couple times and see if we can see if the snake grows. Now let's see if I don't collide with the border here. Oh, got it. Ah, great. It makes it harder on me. We had to hit it about 5 times for you to really be able to see it here. So you can kind of tell right now that it is getting a little bit longer. Yeah, you can definitely tell it now. It's getting longer and longer and longer. So the grow apparently does work. So we're going to go ahead and let it crash to the bottom. So you can tell the snake's tail got a lot longer than it was before. So now we know every time we hit a marker, it actually grew by 8 segments according to our scoreboard here. So this now fixes the grow part of the snake. So the snake is moving. We've hit the marker. We're growing the snake. What's next? We need to be able to tell the user that the game is over with, and that's going to be part of the scoreboard. So let's flip back over to the game, and the game section is we need to be able to tell it that it has the game has ended, and that's going to be oh, there it is. Okay, sorry, almost got my code a little bit confused there. That's going to be within the stop, because remember, stop is called to stop the intervals process, to stop the snake moving, and to be able to basically end the game. So we're now going to tell the scoreboard that we have ended the game. So let's flip back over to the scoreboard code. And inside the scoreboard code, oh, I forgot to flip over again. Sorry about that, guys. So what I did here is I added in the game section the scoreboard end game within the stop, because the stop is what stops the game. So I now need to tell the scoreboard I want to end the game. So now let's flip back over to the scoreboard section, and let's pop the end game method in there. On the end game. So here's the end game itself, and all I'm going to do here is I'm going to add the class called show, because the class.show, this is where we're going to go back to the CSS here. In the CSS here, the class.show is what displays it on the screen. If you notice, we've never seen the word game over or the play again button, and that's because the show button, the show class is not on there. By default, we're not showing anything with the game over. Everything is display none, and again, I'm not going to go into the CSS here. So with the scoreboard here, all I'm doing is I'm going to sit there and add the show class to both the scoreboard and the game over and the restart. And that's it. That's all I'm going to do. So let's flip back over to the browser and let's make sure I've done it. Yep, I've actually flipped over to the browser. And let's just end the game. Boom! Yep, there we are. Game over. So now the player knows what the game is actually over. So let's click on the play again, and oh, that didn't work. And the reason it didn't work is we don't have the code inside there. So guess what we're going to add now? We're going to add the restart section to it. So let's flip back over to the code. Am I at the code? Yes, I'm at the code this time. So let's go over to the code and let's add the restart button so that when we click again on the restart button, it will restart the whole game. The game controls the game controls the game. So now we're going to go to our stop routine, and we're going to add an event listener. And this event listener is going to be the click event on the play again button. And that's going to be on the stop. And I just kind of want to show you really what I've done here. is, first of all, just kind of something really quick here. Usually if you add an event listener, it's there forever. But if there's a third argument to event listeners where you can say, hey, once the event listener has occurred, drop the original listener and don't do it again. Because, you know, the thing is here, if we put the add event listener here and we don't have this once equals true, the second time we play the game, we'll have 2 event listeners on there. The third time we play the game, we'll have 3. The fourth time we'll have 4. And you know, that can just be one gigantic mess. So by having once here, it's going to take away the event listener once the event has occurred. So just kind of a little tidbit there. Okay, the event listener is going to listen for a click event on the restart button, which is gotten from the scoreboard. And it's going to call the restart code for the game. Well, there's no restart code, so let's pop the restart method in there. There's the restart method. And this is where starting position comes back in. I'm now getting the old starting position that we started with that we had within game over, and I'm getting the X, Y direction and length variables from there. And I'm going to release that for a minute. I'm going to reinitialize the game, and then I'm going to go. And this code right here, initialize and go, matches exactly what we have inside the Snake game, initialize and go. So I'm just going to continually initialize and go, initialize and go, initialize and go every time they hit the play again. And that should be all there really is to it. And that apparently is. So let's flip back over to our browser. Let's do a Control F5. And let's just end the game. Game over, play again. So we play again. And one thing I want to do here is I want to make sure the scoreboard actually changes. So I got a score of 1. I end the game. We hit play again. Notice the scoreboard went back to 0. And notice also that the game over and the play again button also disappeared on us. So, whoop, I missed. Oh, it doesn't matter. So now we get the game over and the play again working. So in reality, we pretty much got our entire game working here. But for one thing, notice when I do a Control F5, the snake automatically starts. Well, we really don't want to do that. We want it to be able to start when the user presses one of the arrow keys. So let's pop that code in there, and that will be the end of our presentation here. And that's real simple here. So in the game, I'm going to go up and pop in a property called first key. And this will control whether a first key has been hit or not. And let's add first key to the constructor. And then basically this is going to say it's either going to be false or the key we've pressed. And that if it's false, that means we have not hit the key for the very first time. Inside the process keystroke section, where is it? There it is, process keystroke section. We're also going to now be able to pop the first key inside there, in here. And that allows us to have the first key to be able to say, by using this construction here, we're going to take the direction that we've gotten from line number 35 there and OR it with first key. If direction is null, we're going to return first key, which is going to be false. So it's going to basically sit there and have first key as completely false until we actually hit a key that is a correct direction. And so finally, what we need to do here is that within the move snake section, we need to wrap the entire move snake inside of an if. Because if there has not been a first key hit, we don't want to move the snake. And that's what the if is all about there. And finally, on the restart, we need to be able to set the first key back to false on the restart. So we go to the restart, we set that back to false, and we should be done there. That should do it for us, right? Right? Well, let's find out. Let's flip back over to the code. The browser. Let's Control F5. I'm going to press the U key. Nope. I'm going to press the M key. Nope. I'm going to press the up arrow. Yep, there we go. And so now the game will not start until one of the up, down, one of the arrow keys or the WASD key are hit within the game. Let's just test again, make sure we hit play again. See, absolutely nothing happens until I hit one of the arrow keys. And that basically completes our snake game. Now, like I said earlier, this is a very simple game, so I can present it to you within the space of an hour. And this game just kind of gives you the basics of how to be able to do a snake game. We covered JavaScript modules. We covered a little bit about Canvas. We covered the clear intervals, how to do intervals to get the snake moving. We covered very quickly a couple of event listeners for both moving a snake and the click event. And this is something that you can then take with our GitHub repository, which I'll make public here within the next 15-20 minutes once I'm done here. you can now take this and you can then be able to expand upon it to get all the fancy graphics that you saw in the Google version of it. You know, all the different sounds that it makes. I didn't have sounds because I didn't have sound turned on, but the different sounds it makes, plus all the fancy graphics and whatever. But you have the basis for the snake game here. The movement of the snake, the eating of the marker, the collision detection, the field, the game over, and the scoring, all that kind of fun stuff. So do what you want to with it. Take it. You can see, make sure I'm pointing to the right direction. Here's the GitHub repository. This is our, somewhere around here. Yeah, right there. This is our website, www.TheVirtuoid.com, where you can get all the information for everything that we do here, especially the boring JavaScript videos, which we do on a weekly basis, which covers within the space of 7 to 20 minutes, depending upon how long it takes, just certain little snippets of different pieces of JavaScript. So that's pretty much it. I really, really hope you enjoyed the video. Hope I did not bore you to death. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel to keep track of everything that we do within YouTube, not only our live broadcast, but our boring JavaScript broadcast. You can visit Boring JavaScript at www.boringjavascript.com, subscribe to this YouTube channel, or visit everything we have at www.TheVirtuoid.com. Thanks again for watching our very first live offering, and we'll see you later.